from West Virginia Public Broadcasting.
At the Legislature today, West Virginians serving overseas in the military would have an easier time registering to vote under a measure approved by one Senate committee today. And we'll get a lesson in the budget process and find out how much state government takes in and how much it spends tonight on the Legislature Today.
Good evening, I'm Beth Voorhees. The House Finance Committee continued budget hearings today with the Department of Commerce. As Adam Cavalier reports, the discussion strayed at times from the budget to the businesses the state has and is courting.
So are we getting a cracker plan or not?
It took 45 minutes into the hour-and-a-half meeting for Jackson County Republican Mitch Carmichael to ask the $2 billion question. It came a day after Commerce Secretary Keith Burdett traveled to Texas with Governor Earl Ray Tomblin to meet with Shell officials on West Virginia's prospects of landing said cracker.
We had an informative meeting yesterday. It was informative for, I think, the company and for us. And I would only add, I believe the issues now are almost exclusively site-related. And that becomes an entirely different discussion because you're literally looking at each individual aspect of any given site and trying to determine if, one, if they work, two, if they can be made to work, and three, if it makes sense to make that kind of investment. And so I absolutely appreciate, I can't express how much I appreciate the legislature's willing to say, what other tools do we need to give you?
Secretary Burdett tells us that we have every natural advantage. We have the perfect location, the infrastructure's in place, we have the raw material, the actual natural gas, and yet we still don't have a commitment from a big manufacturer to locate that cracker plant here. And so I'm asking him, what are the impediments to West Virginia obtaining this business that we are perfectly located for?
Burdett says West Virginia has the fastest growing export business over the last 7 quarters nationally, and that it's not all from coal. Harrison County Democrat Sam Cann says the current business climate comes from a bipartisan effort.
We have come together, we've worked together, and we've done some really big, heavy lifting to turn the tide, and I think it's finally starting to pay off. And those figures that he gives, you know, when he states we're the third most fiscally sound state in the country, I mean, that's big news. And when people like Shell is looking at placing a $200 billion cracker plant, that's the reason we're on the radar. And I'd like you just to kind of enlighten us about some of those conversations, what they looked at here and why West Virginia appealed to them over and above some pretty prominent, well thought of places around the country.
Thank you, Jelly. Start the camera. This is a paid commercial. Let me tell you the pitch. It goes a little like this. We're now considered by an independent government relations, state government monitoring service to be the third best fiscally managed state in the country. Our neighbors are in the 40s, 30s and the 40s. The best is in the 30s. The worst is 48th.
I think this legislature over the last 15 to 20 years has taken our major issues and done that, and that's why now we are just now beginning to reap that, and people like Macy's are looking at us and saying, hey, you know, this is a pretty good place to come and set up shop.
I don't think that we truly have done what we need to do in West Virginia to revitalize the business climate here, attract big manufacturers and small business. We have not done those things. In fact, while Secretary Burdett was elaborating on all the wonderful things that are occurring here in West Virginia in terms of our rankings and this and that, I was going on to different websites that shows West Virginia as a judicial phrases hellhole in America. Businesses don't want to locate here because of the judicial climate.
The report Carmichael references is from the American Tort Reform Association. It ranks West Virginia as the third worst state for things such as its lack of full appellate review.
The political process has impeded our growth and hurt our citizens, and it's time for somebody to speak the truth and say, you know, this emperor has no clothes. It's time to absolutely put West Virginia on a path of progress and prosperity. Are we doing a few things right? Certainly. We're pushing to do more.
Burdett spent the majority of the presentation touting West Virginia's business climate, but he says there is one issue with funding West Virginia's park system.
This is a continuing problem area for us. It's the operating line for state parks. That is the biggest supplemental request that the Division of Commerce will make this year.
The request is for $2 million, and it comes because of demolition and construction of buildings in Canaan Valley. For West Virginia Public Broadcasting, I'm Adam Cavalier in Charleston.
Mildred Mitchell Bateman passed away earlier this week from complications from pneumonia. The West Virginia mental health pioneer was 89. Mitchell Bateman was the director of the former Department of Mental Health from 1962 to 1977. She was the first African American to lead a state agency. Bateman's passing was not lost on Wayne County Delegate Don Perdue.
She's the reason that behavioral health in the state of West Virginia has advanced as far as it has. Although I would suggest that she would tell you if she were here today, we got a long way to go. I call attention to this fact today because it's too easy to overlook our heroes. If they become of great age and their acts of heroism are forgotten, hers should never be forgotten and will never be forgotten by those who have people who require the services that she was so constrained and so vivid in supporting. We need more like her. We're going to miss her tremendously. And I would call, again, this wonderful woman's activities on behalf of the health of people throughout the state of West Virginia to your attention, such that you may recall it, at least on this day.
Dr. Mitchell Bateman worked in a variety of capacities during her career, heading the Department of Psychiatry at Marshall University School of Medicine and serving as the superintendent of Lakin State Hospital. The state's mental hospital in Huntington bears her name. Two bills cleared the House today by 94-0 margins. House Bill 4238 establishes procedures for voters enrolled in the Address Confidentiality Program to vote in absentee ballot.
Back in 2007, we established an address confidentiality program designed to protect the addresses of victims of domestic abuse, sexual assault, and stalking. All this bill does is allow those same people who are qualified to be put on the address confidentiality program to vote by absentee and have their address remain confidential.
The other bill to clear the House floor today was House Bill 4251, which relates to amendments to the Uniform Commercial Code. Some West Virginians serving overseas with the military will have a much easier time voting if legislation now moving through the Senate is approved. Bob Brunner has the story.
Military approved a measure allowing late voter registration for those serving overseas, their dependents, and military contractors. Committee Chair Senator Eric Wells says the measure won't affect a lot of people, but it is important.
It's going to affect some folks. It won't affect a whole lot of folks, but what it really does is send a message that West Virginia is interested in not just military members overseas coming back and voting, but also West Virginia citizens who are working abroad. They can come back and they can register in time to be able to take part in the democratic process.
If the measure moves through the legislature as expected, West Virginia would become the 39th state to pass legislation allowing veterans and their families overseas to register to vote right up until Election Day. The committee also approved a bill requiring county clerks to provide up to 8 free copies of the certified death certificate of a veteran with proof of service. For West Virginia Public Broadcasting, I'm Bob Brunner in Charleston.
A senator who began his career in 1968 is retiring from the Senate at the end of this session. Senator John Pat Fanning is 79 and recently underwent open-heart surgery. He faced a tough re-election fight with his district combined with another incumbent. Fanning says it's not politics, but health that was the issue.
My health is, I've got some problems, and I want to spend more time with my family, and I've given it 32 years. And I especially want to thank the people that have allowed me to serve and represent them. I will always be indebted to them, and the people of McDowell County is my life.
After redistricting last year, Fanning's 6th senatorial district stretched from the Huntington Airport all the way through Mercer County. He says it's more than a 200-mile drive.
In a moment, a budget briefing. First, here's a look at some of the bills introduced in the Senate today. Among the bills introduced in the Senate today, Senate Bill 437, Governor Tomlin's bill to address substance abuse issues in the state. Among other things, the bill addresses the regulation of opioid treatment programs, establishes limitations on the dispensing of controlled substances at a pain management clinic, and establishes the use of the multi-state real-time tracking system to stop a purchase of a controlled substance at a pharmacy. Senate Bill 445 to prohibit fundraising by members of the legislature during the 60-day period of the regular session. Senate Bill 446 to expand the bullying offenses to include causing a material disruption of the work of the school. The bill also states that laws against bullying do not infringe upon First Amendment rights of students, teachers, or staff, and does not prohibit expression of religious, philosophical, or political views. Up for passage in the Senate on Monday, Senate Bill 161 to expand the list of those who are required to report abuse and neglect of children to include youth camp administrators or counselors, employees, coaches, or volunteers of any entity that provides organized activities for children. The bill requires all persons to report sexual abuse of children to law enforcement within 48 hours of their knowledge of the abuse. Senate Bill 165 to provide that any jail or prison employee who engages in sexual activity with an inmate regardless of consent is guilty of a felony. Among the bills on second reading on Monday, Senate Bill 108 to require magistrates to possess a bachelor's degree and associate's degree in criminal justice or have at least 4 years prior experience as a magistrate effective January 1st, 2015. And Senate Bill 202 to permit the Division of Forestry to enter into stewardship contracts and agreements with the U.S. Forest Service. Each year, the Department of Revenue publishes both in print and online the governor's executive budget. It's the document each governor hands the Senate President and Speaker of the House just before the State of the State address at the beginning of every legislative session. Tonight, we'll get a brief explanation of the budget process from the two people most knowledgeable about it. In this corner is Mark Muco, Deputy Secretary of the Department of Revenue. He watches how much money the state is taking in. And in this corner is Mike McCowan, the Director of the State Budget Office. He watches how much money the state spends. Gentlemen, welcome. Glad you're here. First of all, Mr. Muco, what's the biggest source of revenue for state government?
By far for the General Revenue Fund is the personal income tax. It brings in about $1.7 billion a year.
All right. Mr. McCowan, what's the biggest ticket item for the
Certainly
state?
is public education. It's
All right.
about 47% of the general revenue budget, $2.1 billion.
$2.1 billion is what the Department of Education receives from the state.
From state general revenue funds, yes ma'am.
What's the second biggest resource?
Would be
revenue?
the consumer sales and use tax, which is about $1.1 billion.
And the second biggest ticket, I believe.
That would be the Department of DHHR, which most of that money is for the Medicaid program.
When you look at revenues, and I have here, this is your document, this is the fiscal forecast for 2013, and this is your document, the executive budget. All right, so when you're looking at revenue, you're looking at what is coming into the state. What kind of pressures do you see? What kind of factors do you see that would affect how much money is going to come into the state?
Well, the West Virginia economy is heavily dependent upon energy, and what goes on in terms of production and pricing of energy has a big impact. We have been fortunate in the last several years to have rising coal prices, which may not be good for utility customers, but for the state treasury, it means a lot of extra revenue. Our severance tax has gone up by about $260 million in 7 years. So that's been a positive. However, there's some storm clouds out there regarding the coal industry. Looks like future production is likely to decrease. Natural gas is fairly cheap. Natural gas is the new industry on the block in terms of significant growth. Gas is actually acting differently than coal. In terms of gas, production is rising and prices falling. And that will have some implications in the future, but gas is actually replacing coal in terms of electric power generation. So as we see coal kind of possibly decline a little bit, gas has to pick up the slack in order to hopefully keep the budget in the balance.
Now, when you're looking at spending the money, what kind of pressures do you have?
The pressures in the next 2 or 3 years will certainly come from Medicaid. The state match will require additional state funds. We've had federal matches, what's called the F match, up in the high 80%, so that every dollar that we spent, the federal government paid 80% of that. Those matches now are down in the lower 70s. So that requires every percentage drop in federal money requires an additional $30 million for state funds. It's a $3 billion program in the state of West Virginia, the Medicaid program. So we've put over $100 million requested $100 million more in FY13. The governor did in his budget. That number will probably need another $200 million next year at this time. So certainly Medicaid and all-around health care costs are certainly the big budget drivers over the next 2 or 3 years.
And one thing the governor pointed out in his State of the State address, this is not Washington, D.C. West Virginia must have a balanced budget. You can only spend what you get.
And we in West, that's very true. We can't print money here in West Virginia. We do balance our budgets, and we're positioned pretty well to handle the next few years. We have had large surpluses over the last few years. We pay our bills on time. We don't borrow money to pay our bills. We have strong cash flow. This morning when I checked the amount of money in the bank, we had over $200 million available if we needed today to pay bills. Our rainy day fund is one of the strongest in the nation at over $800 million.
When's the last time we ever spent any money from the rainy day fund?
2 years ago we did. For 3 years ago, there was a flood in Mingo County.
Okay.
But it's accumulated we're in pretty good shape in our rainy day fund.
What about lottery revenue? We're watching other states come in. For a while, we were the only game in town. Now there's pressure from Pennsylvania, Ohio, Kentucky is considering casino gambling. What's lottery been doing for us?
Well, lottery up until 2007 was a big growth factor in terms of revenue. Since 2007, we've seen decline. And the lottery revenues in next year's budget will be about 16.5% less than this year, mainly because of competition from Ohio. So that's going to put a little bit of a drag on the overall revenue picture.
When you talk about coal, we talk about coal exports, and that too has a significant effect on the impact of the revenue that the state has, yes?
Yeah, definitely.
But when you look at the revenue projections and what coal is going to do, you have to take into account what is happening worldwide, what is happening in Europe and elsewhere, and what effect that's going to have on the revenue stream.
Our projections for 2013 and 2014 have been tempered by what's happening in Europe because about 40% of our coal is currently exported. Europe accounts for about 40% of our exports of coal right now. We've seen some growth in the Asian markets, and hopefully that will continue. But a slowdown in Europe really will have an impact on our exports and actually an impact on coal prices in the future if that occurs.
What kind of coal do they buy? Coal to heat homes or coal to make steel?
Most of the coal that's exported from West Virginia is to make steel, metallurgical coal. Price back in 2003 was only $40 a ton. It's now, middle of last year, was over $180 a ton. So huge increase in the price. Not so much the quantity, but the price has really had an impact.
So you get your balanced budget, you get your documents here, you figured out your revenue, figured out what you're going to spend, and then the legislature comes to town. Now, what impact does the legislature have on revenue, if any? What would the legislature do to impact how much the money is taking in?
Probably the tax department gets a couple hundred different bills, requires fiscal notes. Some of those tax bills become law. To the extent that a tax bill results in an increase in revenue, it would increase revenues. To the extent it results in a decrease, it would decrease revenues. So we usually make adjustments at the end of the year. Since about 2006, the legislature has enacted over $400 million in general revenue fund tax cuts. So far, we've digested about $200 million. We have about $200 million to go. The revenue estimates for the second half of this current fiscal year are adjusted downward a little bit compared to the first half on the sales tax side because we have the sales tax rate on groceries just dropped from 3% to 2%. So,
That's right.
So those type of changes are always reflected into the revenue numbers as they are projected forward.
And then the legislature, of course, holds the purse strings and tells you how much money it wants to spend that may be different from what the governor has recommended.
It may be, and the governor recommended to spend of all the appropriations and all the revenues that we anticipate coming in for FY13, we have recommended spending just about every penny of that. So if the legislature does adjust revenues upward or downward, it will require adjustments on the expenditure side.
What is your role, each of you, in the process here as the legislature goes through, the Finance Committee meets and goes through? What's your role with the legislature then, Mr. McCown?
We interact pretty much daily with the certainly the staff of the finance committees. Constantly questions coming up: why was this added? Why was this deleted? What will be the effect if we pass this bill? So it's a daily conversation.
It's a real collaboration then, and they come to you for?
At this point, in this time of the session, it's usually fiscal note information related to tax bills that are out there pending, and our job is to try to make accurate projections as we can within the 60-day session with a couple hundred bills that come through.
You both have been involved in this business for a number of years with the state government, and I'm always curious as to why people do what they do. Why do you, for instance, like this kind of work, looking at revenue projections and factoring in everything that you have to factor in? Why do you do it? Why do you like it?
I learn something new every day. It's a learning process, and as long as I'm learning something, it's worthwhile. It changes. It's always a dynamic that's every year is a little different, and feel some pride to the extent I'm able to contribute to help make the state fiscal situation run.
That's very interesting. Mr. McCown?
I started straight out of college in 1981 thinking I'd work for state government 2 or 3 years, but it's turned into 30 now. But I enjoy getting up and coming. I don't dread coming into work every day. I enjoy it. It's very challenging. There's never a dull moment. A lot of big numbers. We make some big, important decisions almost daily. So it's a rewarding job.
It's very interesting, and I appreciate the brief budget briefing that you've given us tonight. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And here's a look at some of the bills introduced in the House today. Among the bills introduced in the House today, House Bill 4323 to allow the holder of a barrister's certificate to serve as a volunteer professional educator in the public schools. House Bill 4325 granting the Attorney General prosecutorial power. And House Bill 4327 to require birthing facilities to perform a pulse oximetry screening for congenital birth defects on every newborn in its care a minimum of 24 hours after birth. Among the bills up for passage in the House on Monday, House Bill 4107 to authorize the State Fire Commission to establish the training requirements for volunteer firefighters by legislative rule. On second reading, House Bill 4060 to provide that any corrections employee who engages in sexual contact with an inmate is guilty of a felony regardless of consent. An authorized pat-down, strip search, or other security-related task does not constitute sexual contact. And finally tonight, the saga of the Capitol Food Court has a new chapter. The Capitol cafeteria was renovated a few years ago, and private food service firms that attempted to run it could never make a go of it. Now, the State Division of Rehabilitative Services has taken over operations in the basement of the Capitol building, along with a licensed pizza vendor. Prices are reasonable, and the food is tasty. It's the only place visitors to the Capitol can get a quick meal or snack in the immediate area. The Secretary of Education and the Arts, Kay Goodwin, officiated at the food court's grand opening earlier this week.
I was just so pleased when the division signed the contract sealing the deal for this location to be managed and operated by a licensed vendor through the Randolph Shepherd program.
That federal program is named in memory of the late West Virginia U.S. Senator Jennings Randolph to provide career opportunities for the disabled. There's even a Goodwin grilled cheese sandwich on the menu, named for the cabinet secretary.
And this has been the Legislature Today. We welcome your comments. You can email us at feedback@wvpubcast.org or address your letters to the Legislature Today, West Virginia Public Broadcasting, 600 Capitol Street, Charleston, West Virginia, 25301. I'm Beth Voorhees. Thanks for joining us. Good night.